All right. Welcome. My name is Susan Theriault. I am a Institute Fellow here at the American Institutes of Research, and I'm the Principal Investigator of the Restart Network. I want to welcome you to the Learnings from Research and Practice to Increase Student Engagement. It's the Restart Network's first Virtual National Symposium, and we're really excited to share some of the things we've been working on and outreach we've been doing. But first, I'm going to start with just a little bit of background on the Restart Network. I also do want to mention to folks that if you do have a question, we strongly encourage you to put it into the question and answers. We are happy to address those as we move through, and we'll have a moment of pause after each of our presenters to actually pose some of those questions. So we'll either respond to them in live or respond to them in writing. Thanks. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, what is the Restart Network? The Restart Network is funded by the Institute for Education Science, and we've been tasked with coordinating research activities across 5 IES-funded teams, research teams that are working in partnership with policy leaders and practitioners to understand and learn about recovery for students since the COVID-19 pandemic. The Restart Network, in addition to those 5 research teams, is really interested in synthesizing the evidence from the major investment of ESSER and ARP funding to states and districts, and just understanding what the field is, one, needing and focusing on, and when they've conducted evaluations or research on the work, what they've found, because we're really trying to amplify and learn from what's gone on in the field. There's been lots of innovation and lots of strategies, and we'd love to learn from those and share what works with others that are seeking some alternative or new strategies. We're really focused on ensuring students are recovering in terms of learning and social emotional learning, as well as other aspects of schooling, including teacher well-being. And our plan is to share findings through the national network and continue to outreach to policymakers, practitioners, and research teams to learn what their needs are and to understand the types of strategies that they have seen work. Next slide, please. So what are the key activities of the Restart Network? One, we facilitate convenings for participating research teams in the network, and we support training of early career researchers across the network to start to kind of bolster their skills to conduct post-pandemic research. In addition, we're conducting, as I mentioned, a scan and synthesis of recovery strategies and research on those strategies, and we actually have a study registry for those of you who've been conducting research in this space. We want to hear from you. We'd love to include those in our syntheses. So if you have that, we do have a website that I will mention later in the presentation that you can register your study, even if it's not finished. We just want to know about what you're looking at. And then we're also convening national forums like this one. This is our first national symposium. We are trying to engage a diverse set of participants to understand their viewpoints and to really kind of consider those as we embark on these research studies and conducting these the research syntheses we've been talking about. And then we're trying to make sure we don't just hold the information, but we're getting it out there into the world. And so we're really trying to amplify that through a number of activities, including social media outreach, presentations like today, and other strategies to get information out there. We also have partners in this work, and for this particular symposium, the Council of Chief State School Officers and the National Association of State Boards of Education have collaborated with us on developing this really great and timely presentation of research and practitioner perspectives and policymaker perspectives. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that we have 5 what we call core research teams that the network is working really closely with. They are They come from all over the United States. They are focusing on many different aspects of recovery, including social emotional learning, literacy, recovery and learning acceleration, expanded learning time and extension programs, and just looking at learning opportunities in general. These folks have been conducting their research for about a year now, some for longer, and the findings are starting to come out. And as they are coming out, we are working hard to share those with the field. Next slide, please. So in terms of today's event, I just want to share what our goals are. We want to make sure you're engaged, and this is a webinar format that's very large, and I recognize that. So we want to make sure you have an opportunity to ask questions in the Q&A. We strongly encourage you to do that. We will try to get to those questions as you hear interesting things. We have a packed event today, so we won't be able to likely answer all the questions, but the questions are still important, and we certainly want to be able to get back to you on those if we're not able to address them in the event today. We really want to understand how things are working post-pandemic at multiple levels. So at state levels, at the district level, local level, and school levels, and in the community. So we really want a wide breadth of information from you, sharing of your viewpoints, and understanding the nuances and shifts and needs as we embark on this recovery period. We also are hoping we'll be able to share emerging research and findings on the acceleration of learning, which you'll hear from some great folks today. I think it will be really helpful to each of you. And then we want to create opportunities to learn from the experiences and perspectives of practitioners and policymakers. And we have folks today who will be discussing that. And thanks to all those folks. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Tim and Jennifer from Georgia State University. And they're going to talk about the role of economic insecurity and health stressors on student engagement. Tim, Jennifer?
Thanks, Susan, and welcome everyone. Next slide. So my name is Tim Sass. I'm an economics professor at Georgia State. I'm also the faculty director of the Metro Atlanta Policy Lab for Education. That's our research practice partnership with 5 major school districts in the Atlanta metro area. And we've been working with 3 of those districts throughout the pandemic to track student progress and get a handle on strategies to accelerate student learning as they return to classrooms. Next slide. So here, I just want to give you a quick look at what's been happening in the Atlanta area, and I think it's similar to what we're seeing in other parts of the country. So as you can see here, we've been tracking student progress in 3 school districts, and I'd like you to look at this graph, and there's 3 takeaways here. First is that, as you can see, after schools closed, there was a drop in achievement levels. And then subsequent to that, as students return to in-person learning, we see an upward trend up till the start of last school year. And then last school year, at least in the Atlanta metro area, that progress pretty much stalled. So that the lines look pretty flat for the last school year. The second takeaway is that the third takeaway is that there's differences across districts. So while everybody experienced a decline in achievement during remote learning, and all of our district partners saw some improvement subsequent to returning to classrooms, you can see that there's fairly large differences across the school districts. In particular, District C, which had the highest achievement level pre-pandemic, experienced the smallest reduction in student learning and were the quickest to recover. And that's a pattern I think we're seeing throughout the United States. So at this point, with that context, let me turn it over to my colleague, Jennifer Darlene Arduina, who's going to talk about the work she's leading on student engagement.
Thank you very much, Tim. Next slide. So the aim of the specific portion of our work that I'm going to share with you today is to try to better capture information about students' holistic experiences during the pandemic with the goal of informing and better targeting recovery efforts. So as Tim showed you is true in Metro Atlanta, and as we're seeing is really well established across academic literature, students experienced lower rates of achievement growth during the pandemic than we would have expected if the pandemic didn't occur. And despite sizable investments in recovery efforts, not all students are achieving at the levels we might have expected if the pandemic had not occurred. We also know that students belonging to marginalized groups are most likely to remain behind their pre-COVID trends. At the same time, we know that student learning is shaped by personal and societal out-of-school experiences. We also know the COVID-19 pandemic disproportionately affected the lives of the same students that we're seeing sort of remaining behind pre-COVID trends. So that led us to ask and attempt to answer, what are these underlying individual and larger socio-political reasons for lower rates of learning during COVID? And then based on our findings, which we're sharing preliminary findings with you today, we hope to highlight the key individual, programmatic, institutional, and societal factors that can be used to better identify, design, and target recovery efforts moving forward. Next slide. So to achieve this, we've pulled together student-level administrative data from our 3 partner districts. We've administered a family survey, accessed eviction data, and merged in virtual learning system log data that's sort of tracking every time the system logs into virtual programs and what they're doing while they're there. So as you can see in this figure, our district partners serve a student population that's anywhere from 44 to 70% Black, 39 to 99% free or reduced price lunch eligible, and 11 to 20% limited English proficiency. Additionally, we identified around 3 to 4% of all students in each district experienced an eviction in 2021. And then as you're looking between districts, trying to get a comparison, you'll see District A tended to serve a student population that had a higher proportion of students belonging to minoritized and lower income groups. Next slide. So to guide our analysis, we conceptualize the role of various economic insecurity, health stressors, and protective factors on students' precursors to learning, their engaged behaviors, and subsequent achievement growth. And if you wouldn't mind clicking one more time. Okay, so all these items highlighted in orange are questions that are being pulled from our survey, which closed just last month. So you're going to see some really early preliminary results here today. One of the major challenges that we're currently discussing how to navigate and how to most appropriately respond and use the data is an overall low response rate from families, which has been a common challenge across multiple studies in the post-COVID era. Nonetheless, we're considering ways to minimize this concern. We do actually have a relatively large sample size, even though it's a low proportion. So we're going to find some good ways to still use that data, but are very much open to ideas if anyone has suggestions. Would you click one more time? Perfect. So the engaged behaviors that we're focusing on are behavioral, emotional, and agentic. And maybe try clicking one more time. Oh, okay, good. And so we did have a chance to look at some differential response rates to see the extent to which the families that were responded to the survey looked similar on observable characteristics to the districts as a whole. And so we do want you to consider, as you're interpreting and listening to our findings, that in District A, we found that Black families and families with younger kids were more likely to respond. In District B, we found that families from middle income areas were more likely to respond. And then in District C, we didn't see any clear pattern by regional income. Next slide. So with that noted, here are some of our initial preliminary findings. So overall, we identified pretty consistent patterns across districts. You'll see that over 80% of families reported that there was an adult monitoring student learning during the virtual era of COVID-19 learning. You'll also see that 10% or more by district also reported hiring a tutor to assist their child or children. In regards to the economic insecurity items, we saw 20 to 29% of our families reported a job loss. We see that around 47 to 68%, depending on the district, reported at least one essential employee in the household. And when you start looking at health stressors, 42 to 50% of respondents reported someone in the household with an increased risk of health complications from COVID-19. And then 26 to 31% of respondents across districts reported that their child knew someone who had died from COVID-19. Next slide. We next took a look at some of the engagement trends, and just to make sure everything's in context, fall 2019 is representing pre-COVID-19 data. Fall 2020 is what we've defined as early COVID-19. Most school districts were still virtual. District C was the only one that started bringing back some students. And then fall 2021 is late COVID, when all 3 districts had returned to fully in-person learning. And these are parent reported with students. They filled out the survey with their children, if applicable, but of how much behavioral, emotional, and agentic engagement students felt at each of these different time points. Overall, you're seeing sort of similar trends across districts. There is a notable drop between fall of 2019 and 2020, with minimal recovery between fall of 2020 and 2021, with this one exception, which is District C, and this sort of mirrors what we're seeing in achievement trends as well, where we're observing more of a return to normal in these parent-reported student engagement measures. And our hypothesis at this point is that the divergence might be due to the fact that District C was the first district to return to in-person learning and had one of the more robust recovery strategies. Next slide. So in conclusion, we found high rates of adult monitoring during virtual learning, with a small but still notable proportion reporting hiring professional tutors. Many families experienced economic insecurity, but some of the health stressors appeared even more prevalent. And then when examining engagement trends, we only observed evidence of a partial rebound in that one district. Our next steps include testing the hypotheses that we posited in our conceptual framework using quasi-experimental design. And we're still considering and are very open to suggestions you might have on how to adapt our initial analytic plan given the small survey sample size. We're also looking into different ways to create composite indices for the various areas that we're interested in: economic insecurity, health stressors, and protective factors. Next slide. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. If you want more information on the research that we've conducted so far over multiple years during the COVID-19 recovery, if you want more information on what was presented here and/or want to stay up to date with upcoming reports, please make sure to check out our website shown here on this slide. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that presentation. Hi, my name is Laura. I'm here from the Restart Network, and I wanted to just elevate a few of the questions that came in during your presentation for you to answer. The first one is if the survey that you were presenting about is available publicly.
The scales that we use to study engagement are available publicly. I don't think, Tim, that we have shared it publicly. But that's something that we can discuss opening up so that others could use it as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Going back to slides 14 and 15, a question came in between those. If the color coding across those 2 slides was the same for each district.
The behavioral, emotional, agentic color coding?
I guess between 14 and 15, so if we could flip back and forth between them.
Oh, I think that the colors switched based on the
Yes, okay. I think you're right. I just wanted to revisit that.
The templates that were provided. I think one of them flipped it.
Absolutely. Could you say more about the recovery strategies used in District C? Is there anything distinct about them that may have fueled the support?
Well, one thing was that District C had a very robust in-school high-dosage tutoring strategy. So we know from past evidence that that's a very effective strategy for accelerating student learning. So we think that's part of it. Another thing is that District C chose to have a number of district-led initiatives, whereas A and B were much more geared toward individual schools deciding the specifics of their recovery strategies.
Thank you so much. If anyone else has a question at this time, you can put it in the Q&A portal. That's where we'll be taking questions. Just give it a second. Okay, well, if you have any more, just let us know which presentation you're asking a question about, and we can also revisit these closer to the end. Thank you so much, Jennifer and Tim. We really appreciate it. Up next, we will be hearing from Melissa McGrath, Chief of Staff at the Council of Chief State School Officers. And Melissa, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you, Jennifer and Tim. That was such an incredible presentation. I can't wait to dig in more on your future data. Good afternoon, and thanks to AIR for hosting today's event, and thanks for inviting CCSSO to be a part of it. For those of you who don't know, CCSSO is the Council of Chief State School Officers. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan nationwide organization that represents public officials who head departments of elementary and secondary education in the states, the District of Columbia, the Department of Defense, the Bureau of Indian Education, and the 5 U.S. extra state jurisdictions. I want to briefly highlight some of the work around the pandemic recovery that CCSSO has done to date, and then we're really excited to hear from state leaders in Missouri and in North Carolina about the work they have underway. Since the pandemic forced school building doors to close in the U.S. in March 2020, we've supported state education leaders as they navigated every turn, whether it meant managing in the moment crises or setting long-term recovery visions or investing federal relief dollars efficiently for their students, educators, and communities. We have proudly supported their leadership with tools, resources, and cross-state sharing. In addition, we set up 2 specific initiatives: the Coalition to Advance Future Student Success and the COVID Relief Data Project. Next slide, please. The Coalition to Advance Future Student Success is proud to shine a light on some of the ways that the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, or ESSER funds, investments are making an impact in communities across the country. The coalition is comprised of 12 leading education organizations that represent leaders from practitioners in the classroom to state capitol, working together to ensure that this moment of transformation brings about greater equity and outcomes for all students across the country. And you can see the organizations that are a part of the coalition listed on this slide. In addition, we also bring together 35 plus advisory group organizations to provide thought, partnership, and perspective to inform the coalition's work. Our work is driven by a shared framework and is anchored in the commitment to ensure the effective and equitable use of federal funds across our membership organizations. The coalition member organizations' priority areas include academic recovery, sustainability, physical, mental health, and well-being, and recruiting and retaining a talented educator workforce. Next slide, please. The coalition seeks to elevate these effective and innovative initiatives to support these focus areas, and we do this in the following ways. On our website, advancefuturestudentsuccess.org, we are dedicated to elevating stories of how relief funds are being leveraged across the educational landscape. On our website, you can see a resource library that offers over 100 videos, reports, articles, and white papers from coalition members. We have a blog that features voices of the coalition and their insights on this opportunity to transform the state of our public schools. And we have a monthly newsletter that highlights stories from coalition members on how they're using ESSER funds. And we welcome you to subscribe to that newsletter. On the next slide, you can see more about CCSSO's COVID Relief Data Project. This is an initiative we at CCSSO are leading to study and share how states are supporting the pandemic recovery effort using the 10% state set aside from ESSER funds. Through this project, we're documenting trends, promising practices, and student outcomes to illustrate the impact of state ESSER investments. And you can visit our website there at ccsso.org/ESSER funds to explore examples, reports, and videos that address topics specific to student well-being, teacher recruitment and retention, and high impact tutoring, and much more. Next slide, please. As a refresher, ESSER funds were first authorized in March 2020 through the CARES Act, and Congress authorized 2 subsequent rounds of funding, and ultimately that allocated $190 billion to support pandemic relief and recovery in K-12 schools. While most of the funds were directly allocated to school districts, states could set aside 10% at the state level to support activities. This amounts to $19 billion in largely flexible funds that can be used to address statewide recovery priorities. And we at CCSSO created the COVID Relief Data Project to track that 10% state set aside of funds. On this slide, you can see across all 3 buckets of funding, how we've been tracking those funds and how they've been prioritized among the 50 states. Primarily, this includes $4.4 billion invested in tutoring and accelerated learning, $3 billion for out-of-school time opportunities, $1.4 billion for curriculum and instruction, and $1.2 billion for remote learning. Other priorities have included the educator workforce, $1.5 billion in support for student and staff well-being, and $1.1 billion in connection, as we know that was really important throughout the pandemic. Recognizing that ESSER is both an unprecedented investment in K-12 schools and a one-time relief program, state education agencies are working to measure the impact of their ESSER investments and to inform future sustainability plans. To date, more than 30 states have developed public reports or dashboards to show the public how local education agencies are using their ESSER allocations. And this information helps stakeholders understand how districts are prioritizing their recovery investments. Additionally, CCSSO's research shows that states have collectively invested more than $350 million to support data and reporting, which includes state commission studies and evaluations of the impact of ESSER funding. These efforts are already demonstrating that recovery investments are paying off, and we heard about some of that in the previous presentation. As ESSER funds are going to sunset in 2024, states are considering strategies to learn from these large-scale recovery investments and how they can sustain the impactful programs going forward. Next slide, please. Thank you again for having us at today's event. Please explore our links on the event resource page or follow up with us at CCSSO if you would like to learn more. And now I'm really excited that you'll be able to hear from 2 states, Missouri and North Carolina. I'd like to introduce Dr. Margie Van Dieven, Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education for the Missouri Department of Education, and her colleague, Dr. Paul Katnick, the Assistant Commissioner in the Office of Educator Quality, who will present next. And after them, you will be honored to hear from Dr. Jenny Korn, who's the Director of Research and Evaluation for the Office of Innovation in the North Carolina Department of Education. With that, I will hand it over to you, Commissioner Van Dieven.
Thank you, Melissa. And I really do appreciate all the support CCSSO has provided us over the past several years. Very much so appreciated. It's a great segue here between Jennifer and Tim. Thank you so much for your presentation, speaking a lot about the influences that our students must deal with and how that impacts their performance. What we did at the state of Missouri was look at what was the single greatest school level factor. And we all know that that's the educator. The greatest school level factor that will impact student performance is that of the educator. And so we invested, given the opportunities Melissa mentioned with our state set aside dollars, we took that opportunity to invest historic proportions to our educator workforce and recruitment and retention efforts. So I am going to pass it to my colleague, Dr. Paul Katnick, who is our Assistant Commissioner for Educator Quality, and let him share what we have collected to date, how we've used those funds, and some of the improvements that we are seeing. So Dr. Katnick, if I could pass it to you. Welcome, and thank you for all of your work that you've been doing with us in our state.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Paul Katnick here, as the Commissioner mentioned. Happy to visit with you a little bit about what we've been doing here. As you can see on our next slide, one of the things that we firmly believe in Missouri is what the research tells us, that the key to effective education for students is effective educators. It starts with and it ends with people. Other things matter, but research for a lot of years has been overwhelmingly clear on this. Teachers matter most and principals matter next most. In addition, principals matter in ways that multiply how our teachers matter. And that's why Missouri's pandemic response and recovery is focused on Missouri educators, both our teachers and our leaders. As Commissioner mentioned, in August of 21, we released recruitment and retention grants that totaled around $50 million. We had a large number of institutions that participated. About 480 school districts got a recruitment, or what we call Grow Your Own grant. It was 43 of our educator preparation programs, 13 of our community colleges, and then 500 of our school districts participated in our retention grants. And we included in all of this a 4-phase evaluation study. And one of the things we want to do with you today is share some of the data from phase 3 of those 4 phases of evaluation. Also talk to you a little bit today about our Missouri Leadership Development System. We've been implementing that for the past 7 years. Last year, it served almost 1,600 of our principals and assistant principals. Our preliminary data this year suggests it could be closer to 2,000. The work we do with those principals in over 3/4 of our schools and 1/3 of our charter schools is key to our pandemic response and our recovery efforts. And we'll share some of that with you today as well. But just a couple of other key initiatives that I want to mention here before we get to that. First of all, we're in our second year of a teacher baseline salary grant. This goal was to increase teacher pay to at least $38,000 for all teachers, especially our youngest ones. It began with a $21 million allocation. This year was expanded to $29 million. It began with a 70-30 match, 70% state, 30% local. In this current year, it's 100% state plus 16% for payroll benefits. Last year, we had 364 school districts. This year, 316. 6,370 teachers benefited last year. This year, 4,771. We think that drop in numbers that you're hearing is because we're improving pay across the state. For instance, our average starting pay in our teachers rose from $33,324 to now $40,900. So we're pleased about that. Another area is career ladder. We're in our second year of that. This is to increase compensation for teachers with over 2 years of teaching experience. Last year's allocation at $37 million is now $69 million this year. We have a 60-40 match, 60% state, 40% local. We have 139 school districts that participated last year, up now to 205 school districts. 11,300 teachers or so last year benefited. This year, we're at 21,238 teachers, or 30% of our workforce. The total state allocation this year totals at $83 million being paid to help teachers with pay. Our Grow Your Own grants, this is a first ever state allocation, and its goal is to build Grow Your Own programs in all of our school districts. A $2.5 million allocation, it's going to result in 125 school district grants. We had 192 applications that came in for that. 15 educator preparation grants, 23 applications for that, and then 5 community college grants. And then finally, another first ever scholarship grants that we got. This is to increase new teachers in our hard to staff locations and content areas in particular. It's an $800,000 allocation. 21 educator preparation programs are going to help us with administering those. They're going to go to teacher candidates who do student teaching and do interviews in one of 300 high need schools based on our poverty counts. But let's go back now and talk about the recruitment and retention grants that we started with. On this side, you'll see some of our data from phase 3 of our evaluation study. Obvious purpose for evaluating these grants is to determine what works, because as we know, our teachers matter most. Investing in strategies that are creating substantive changes in supply and demand for our teacher workforce enhances our pandemic response and our recovery efforts. I want to first note the magnitude of the study that we're doing. I mentioned previously the large number of institutions that are participating. For this third round of evaluation, we had an extraordinarily high response rate. 96% of our school districts responded to data around our teacher recruitment efforts, 98% of our educator preparation programs, 92% response rate from our community colleges. And what this tells us is that this high response rate means we're basically doing a border-to-border, fully comprehensive study, all kinds of schools and institutions, all kinds of communities, all focused around what works in teacher recruitment. First, let me give you some general findings. 6 out of 10 of our school districts believe they've improved their recruitment efforts. We've also seen evidence of an increase of hundreds of high school students across the state who are now in Grow Your Own programs who weren't before. Our school districts have cited increased availability of financial resources for recruitment. They've also noted the effective ongoing support of our state agency, DESE. They also noted the support from stakeholders and outside partners and contributions from sponsoring mentor teachers. The data we're showing here captures LEA perceptions on whether they're seeing indicators of success and compares those perceptions from last year in 2022 to those this year in 2023. A third of our school districts last year, and now over half, are seeing more collaboration with higher education. Our school districts also point to an increased interest in teaching as a profession from 30% last year to now 58%. A quarter of our school districts last year to now a third of them note improved collaboration with community partners. A year ago, 24% of our school districts and now 46% are seeing success in building their pool of teacher candidates. And there's been an increase from 21% to 33% of school districts that see some success in recruiting for our hard to staff content areas like special education, math, and science. Let's talk next about some of the data we're getting from our teacher retention grants. Increased supply through recruitment is just half of our approach to addressing shortage issues in our state. We also decided we needed to address the supply side as well by increasing our teacher retention percentages. We addressed this through retention grants that were accepted by around 500 of our school districts. In evaluating these grants, just like our recruitment ones, we had an extraordinarily high response rate of 96%. Again, as I said before, that we believe this signals that we've got a border-to-border, fully comprehensive study around what works in teacher retention. First, some general findings. Nearly 2/3 of our school districts believe they've improved their retention efforts. School districts also cited increased availability of financial resources for addressing teacher retention. School districts cite the effective ongoing support they're getting from our department. School districts indicate that input from teachers, community support, and opportunities to learn from other school districts are enhancing their teacher retention efforts. And finally, school districts noted that participation of their principals in our Missouri Leadership Development System, the MLDS, is actually improving their efforts to retain teachers. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. As shown here, this data captures LEA perceptions on whether they're seeing indicators of success compared with their perceptions last year in 2022. 44% of our school districts see some indicators of success in onboarding new teachers. They also point to an increase in retaining high-quality teachers from 29% last year to now 62%, quite a jump there. School districts are having more success providing customized support, which is improving teacher retention, 21% last year, now 34%. There's also success in retaining teachers in hard-to-staff locations, like our urban school systems and our deeply rural school systems, which has risen from 18% to now 37%. And there's been success in retaining teachers in hard-to-staff content areas like special education, math, and science, which has risen from 23% last year to now 42%. As I said before, let's talk about principals next and their impact on post-pandemic response and recovery. We've mentioned MLDS, which is our Missouri Leadership Development System, multiple times already. The most important letter in MLDS is the S, because this is a statewide system. With all professional organizations as our partners, we use blended funding to support it. We have essential components codified in policy, like program approval, PD, mentoring requirements, and administrative certification. We also use MLDS micro-credentials and digital content. Working with our partners, we've developed 5 domains of leadership. We think of these as kind of separate but essential hats that principals wear, oftentimes simultaneously. There's a domain of visionary leadership with 2 strands, you'll notice there. Instructional leadership and 4 different strands. Managerial leadership with 3 different strands. Relational leadership with 3 different strands. And innovative leadership with 3 different strands. And none of these are groundbreaking, things no one else has ever thought of. But what we think matters is the scale in which we're doing it. As we mentioned earlier, MLDS served nearly 1,600 principals and assistant principals last year, and our preliminary data shows it could be closer to 2,000 this year. We believe principals are vital to pandemic response and recovery. If the principal is not involved in the work, or in any solution for that matter, it's not going to happen. At least that's what the research tells us. And the MLDS footprint is large, impacting around 80% of Missouri's school districts and 30% of Missouri's charter schools. What this means to us is that this system can achieve far-reaching impact on key department priorities. Let's take a look at several of those. We are using MLDS to push forward in these priority areas. And it's important to note, these weren't selected at random. One of the advantages of working with a large number of principals and assistant principals from a wide variety and a large number of schools is we hear directly from them about what they need to help their staff and students respond to the challenges that the pandemic gave us. So we know from these principals they need help in these areas. First, the acceleration, not the remediation of learning. Work in this area brings to mind the words of Ron Edmonds in 1982 when he said, "We can, whenever and wherever we choose, successfully teach all children whose schooling is of interest to us. We already know more than we need to do that. Whether or not we do it must finally depend on how we feel about the fact we haven't done it so far. The key to accelerating learning is working with our principals on the fundamentals of learning, things we know from research that improve it, like grade appropriate assignments, strong instruction, deep engagement, and high expectations." Next, student well-being. Our students went through something none of us did. They went home at spring break and they didn't come back. They saw the world in masks, waiting for a vaccine to be developed, while daily the news reported on the growing death count. And some of those folks they knew personally. After going through all of that, our students need us now more than ever. We work with our principals on the need for strong relationships, creating positive climate and culture, developing and implementing systems to recognize and respond to the intense needs of not just some of our students, but many of them. And finally, around recruitment and retention of teachers. The quality of the principal's team of teachers creates the quality of student learning. We help principals with creating learning communities and networks because accomplished teachers don't want to work in isolation. We help principals with building partnerships inside and outside of their school. We work with principals on making the profession appeal to a younger generation of teachers who want to make a difference in the world. We help our principals expand ownership and motivation across their staff, on creating and maintaining a positive professional culture, and on developing career path opportunities that feature teacher voice and teacher leadership. All of these, we believe, contribute to teacher recruitment and retention. Finally, here are some of the resources for you. Here's a link to the MLDS page with information on our system and how it supports principals across the state, as well as data from 5 comprehensive evaluations that have been done on MLDS over the past 5 years. And interestingly enough, those evaluations were done pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and now post-pandemic. There's also a link to our recruitment and retention page, which has the information we talked about in terms of our investments in recruitment and retention, as well as various reports that show the type of data we monitor to determine the supply and demand issues of our workforce and measures for whether or not our efforts are finally working. Finally, we share with you our contact information should any of you want to contact us with further questions.
Thank you so much to you both. We did have a few questions that came in, if you're willing to answer them now. Great. The first one that came in is, will you be tracking the retention rates for over the long term of the teachers who were recruited through your investments?
We'll try to do that. Part of that will be getting a unique identifier for everyone who benefited from the grants and then tracking them into that. We think our educator preparation programs can help us best do that. So we'd sure like to look at it that way. That's what we think is most telling is those state aggregate retention rates and enrollment dates and completer program percentages. That's going to show us whether or not we've actually increased supply across the state. We have a good decade's worth of data, so we can watch for changes across that historical data. And then also we track retention rates of teachers in our school districts, which of course links directly to the supply side of our workforce.
Wonderful. And that was a great segue into another one of the questions that came in, which is, how did you involve educator and leader prep programs?
Gosh, they were involved right from the start. It kind of was a first thing for us. We send a lot of money through school districts. We don't often through institutions of higher education. And This provided us an opportunity to give grants directly to every single prep program we have in the state and every single community college, which is kind of a first for us. But as you saw from the percentages, collaboration percentages went up on both sides of the equation. And at the end of the day, that's how you make this work. You've got school districts working with higher education, working with the department, and the three of us together, we think, can make a difference.
Thank you. Switching a little bit, we have a question that came in that says, I know it's early, but I'm wondering what student outcomes you are looking at related to educator and school leader programs. Have you seen improvements in student outcomes such as SEL or academic outcomes?
There's one piece of data, I don't think I included it on the slides we had time to show you guys, but there was one where we asked all these hundreds of school districts, do you think that your improved retention efforts is contributing to improved student achievement? And we got a very strong showing on that as well. So we have phase 4 yet to go. And I think a follow-up question on that one's going to be, tell us about why you think that's true. And we'll see what they tell us.
Great. Okay, well, that covers it for now. So I think next we're going to hear from Dr. Jenny Korn. So Jenny, are you able to join us? There you are. Okay,
yes,
wonderful.
I'm here.
I'll let you pick it up from here. Thank you.
Awesome. Just going to turn on my timer, trying to keep it nice and tight. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jenny Korn. I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation at the Department of Public Instruction. I have been here at the department for about 2 years, a little over, focused almost entirely on recovery research and evaluation. My background, I'm a trained researcher evaluator working all over the state of North Carolina. I was actually part of our external race to the top evaluation team way back when. So this work is very sort of part of my DNA, part of my background. I was raised here in North Carolina, so have a great deal of commitment and affinity for the state. If you'll go to the next slide. So one of the things, the state superintendent created the Office of Learning Recovery and Acceleration back in March 2021. We have a statewide elected superintendent. So she actually joined the department, started her administration right in the middle of the pandemic. And one of the very first things she did, in addition to really trying to be strategic about getting very trusted, experienced leaders into her cabinet, understanding that it was such a tenuous, difficult time for our K-12 education community. She really knew and understood that the entire K-12 public school system really needed experienced and trusted leaders at the very top making the decisions. And one of the other things that she put in place, Superintendent Catherine Truitt, was she created this Office of Learning Recovery and Acceleration. She wanted to make sure that everybody in the field knew who to contact if they had a question about recovery programming, about ESSER funds, about kind of the new supports, trying to create a space of innovation, responsiveness. And so the superintendent created, like I said, this Office of Learning Acceleration. That's how I was brought in, because she was kind of laser focused on this idea of evidence-based policymaking. And so I was able and given some space to hire a qualitative analyst, a quantitative analyst, and then some data visualization. We were able to spin up and think about interns that could be brought into the department to help us really be connected to the most modern sort of data analysis techniques. So we really prioritize providing the research needed to making evidence-based decisions, being hyper transparent about all the information that we were both collecting and sharing out. We also were very committed to partnering with PSUs, to our public school units. Those are districts and charters in our state. We wanted to make sure that they had technical assistance and supports and could call and reach out for for requests on professional development, on data and analysis. And so we really dedicated ourselves, instead of compliance and oversight, to support and connecting and partnering with districts around the state, districts and charters. And we also wanted to serve as a central point of contact for anybody externally or internally wanting to do work on recovery for the state. I linked down at the bottom, when you guys get access to the slides, our main OLR webpage, as well as this research and recovery kind of blog that we worked on. If you go to the next page, go to the next slide. So we helped to that coordination kind of component. We helped to coordinate an enormous, and are still doing this, coordinating an enormous amount of research that went on. And you just heard some great examples of evaluations and research, external research funded in the state of Georgia, as well as in the state of Missouri. Well, what we did was our office was kind of responsible for coordinating all these different studies. Today, I'm going to highlight the two that are kind of highlighted in blue quickly. One is was in partnership with the EVAS team at SAS, and it was that the analysis that you guys hopefully have heard about at this time, like the impact of the pandemic on the K-12 public school system. And then we also, the IES award was one that we did in partnership and makes us a part of this recovery, the Restart Recovery Network. But collectively, this was more than $10 million of braided funding for research on recovery that is still ongoing. If you go to the next slide. So we were able to partner with the EVAS team at SAS. We are an EVAS state, and I think a lot of the states around the country kind of partner with them in different ways, but they are our kind of growth estimate, educator evaluation, analysis partner. And so we were able to pretty quickly get in place a very rigorous and robust study with them that in 2022 we called the lost instructional time analysis, and then in 2023 we really pivoted from that lost instructional time language to recovery analysis. And that's the chart that you're seeing up at the top with the gray bars. We really did a lot of talking about the negative effects. So all of the information was presented in terms of effect sizes. We were able to do kind of statewide. We were able to provide individual district level reports that mirrored exactly what the state, state type of analysis. We broke down all of that the impact of lost instructional time and recovery analysis data by every different student group you can think of, by race, by region, by EDS, by all the federal government kind of identified groups of students likely disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. So homeless and foster and English learners. We were able to break all of this data, all of these reports down by those really critical student groups, because then we were able to have conversations both at the state level and down at the local level that really targeted our interventions to address the impacts and those students most negatively impacted by the pandemic. And just this last year, we just recently released in partnership with the EVAS team, this brand new year-over-year model. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about this today. We also have linked in down at the bottom, those reports are available on our roundup on our blog. So if you go to the next slide. So we kept getting questions. I'm sure all of you have too, these big questions from legislators and the general public and media about how will we know when we have recovered, when as a state, a district, or a school, how do we quantify recovery, and how can we account for local context in terms of progress towards recovery? So we worked really closely with the EVAS team at SAS. If you go to the next slide. And created this, what we're calling year-over-year analysis. So what we did is we used our average scale score for individual tested subjects. So this one, I believe, is I think this is EOG grade level 3 reading. And so you see here, you can see the average scale score are those little like purpley dots. you see the general achievement trajectory starting going all the way back to 2013 up through 2022, and we're just about to add 2023, but this is hot off the press, just released in August. And then we created 2 benchmarks as a state. We said that for some districts and for some tested subjects, your benchmark for recovery might be the dotted black line, would basically be you're extending the trend line down from 2013 all the way down to 2022. In this particular instance, and for some of our districts around the state, they might have had a general negative trend, which is where we were with EOG reading grade 3. And then you can kind of see pre-pandemic, that's the general trend line. Or you could set your threshold, your benchmark for recovery as your 3-year average, which is the dotted blue line. And so as a state, we can decide which of those trend lines seem most relevant and applicable for the local context. So each of our districts got this exact same analysis, but it also added the state average on there. So as a state, one of our kind of very under-resourced districts might choose one benchmark for recovery, and that's a local level decision, whereas another one might see the state average as one that they want to trend. So really trying to be responsive and thoughtful about how we take these policy questions and use kind of a rigorous research approach that's really like a population study for our state to help guide districts and how they think about defining recovery, really grounded in their local context. If you go to the next slide. So some of the next steps with continuing this work past 2024, we are really dedicated to this idea of evidence-based policymaking. We are constantly providing these regular research updates to state and local education leaders. We have kicked off a brand new practitioners network, which is really about building research capacity of our local school districts. We're using some ESSER funds on that. It's brand new, applications just closed. We're going to be doing that this academic year. We continue to submit research proposals with our trusted research partners inside the state to get federal grants, like the IES study that funded our partnership with the Restart Network. As well as exploring opportunities to get grants with state and national foundations. We are continuing to advocate with our General Assembly because our office is ESSER funded. So advocating to include this expansion budget request to our General Assembly to establish a permanent Office of Research and Evaluation at DPI, as well as exploring other permanent funding sources that we already have available to us, such as our ESSA funds that come into the state each year. So with that, I think that was my last slide. I don't know if I've got one more. Yep, and that's it. And I'll close and see if any questions popped up. But thank you for your time and your attention today.
Thank you, Jenny. We did have a question come in. Within North Carolina, in what ways do you disseminate the learnings from your office? Do you use superintendent networks or have you found other organizations?
So we do have a very robust superintendents network. We have a principals association, we have a teacher educator association, several of those. And then we also have a little mantra in our office, bringing the data to the people. So we actually went out into the field. Our state is divided into 8 regions. So we held strategic data sessions out in the field last spring. We're going to do it again this spring. And we also held summer convenings where we brought everybody together in Raleigh to talk about some patterns they were seeing across districts.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. I think that's it for now, but if anybody else has a question, please feel free to submit it. And thank you so much for sharing. Up next, we'll hear from the National Association of State Boards of Education. Hi, Paulo. I'll let you take it away.
Hi, thanks so much, Laura. It's great to be with everybody today. When we first heard that the topic for today's symposium was going to be student engagement, we were really thrilled because this is a topic that is near and dear to the hearts of state boards of education across the country. Many of you know that state boards actually have student members reflective of how serious they take the idea of making sure the student voice is at the table in terms of policymaking and driving practice and initiatives, but as well as making sure that the student voice is informing the work and the awareness of the older people around the table, so that they're cognizant of the needs that students are facing in their in the real world and day to day. As was stated, my name is Paulo Di Maria. I'm the president and CEO of the National Association of State Boards of Education. Many of you know your own state board of education in your state. These are policymakers, but they actually reflect more often than not the citizen voice of policymaking in the policymaking arena in states. And they play interesting roles. Many times they have statutorily prescribed responsibilities, but they also play a role in identifying priorities and driving agendas. And they've been playing a key part in all the activities that go on in states relative to recovery from the pandemic. So let's go to the next slide. The reason I was so excited about this is 3 times a year, NASB publishes what's known as the State Education Standard. This is our flagship publication. And our recently released issue earlier this month, earlier in September, mid-September, was called Engaging All Students. And again, we choose the topics for the State Education Standard based on the interest of our members. And our members were saying, yes, we understand. They were seeing enrollment numbers going down. They knew that students were hurting by virtue of the experience they had during the pandemic. And they said, what are some of the things that are happening? What does the research tell us? What are some promising practices? What can we learn and increase our awareness around in terms of student engagement? And so we chose this topic many months ago, and we're ultimately very pleased to put out this publication. What you'll find is that we view state board members as really wanting to have practical and easily digestible information that they can use as they serve in their roles as state board members. And so when you read a copy of the State Education Standard, regardless of the topic, you'll find articles that are not too lengthy, are not too heavy in terms of sort of academic language. They focus in on key questions or key actions that state board members can take. And so consequently, they're very useful to just about anybody in the policymaking arena because it's designed to really raise awareness, provide information, provide examples, and help people, understand the way they can engage around the particular policy area. In this particular issue, there were 7 articles, and what my short presentation here is going to do is just give you a brief, identify those 7 articles, their authors, and what kind of information they contain. And then this is your homework assignment, is to go in and find our publication. You can see it at nasbe.org, nasbe.org/publications. Look for the State Education Standard, and this is the most recent version. You'll see a picture of this cover on our website, as well as it's the September 2023 issue. So let's go to the next slide. The first article was by Jennifer Fredericks at Union College, and I really liked it a lot because what Jennifer does is she really identifies the different types of student engagement. Sometimes we say the word student engagement and we think of it fairly simplistically, but there's really a lot of nuance to the idea of student engagement. And so you will find in this article a table that discusses some of the different varieties, and then the factors that contribute to increased student engagement. So this article, I found it to be a really nice sort of primer overview of the whole idea of what is student engagement and what are the factors that contribute to increasing it, as well as providing a variety of samples of engagement interventions. And some of those samples we'll talk about in more detail as we talk about the other articles. And Jennifer also provides implications for state policy. A lot of times, state board members are pretty honest with themselves about how policy has to cascade through the system to actually have an impact in the classroom. And there are just some things that defy the involvement of policy. But there are some things that state boards can do to create the conditions that allow for greater student engagement. And sometimes it's also just elevating great practices that may be happening in the state or in other parts of the country that serve as illustrative examples, and then encouraging districts and states and schools to be deliberate about the work they do in engagement. Let's go to the next slide. The next article is from Bob Balfance. Many of you know Bob. He's at Johns Hopkins. He's also the head of the Grad Partnership, which has a focus on college and career readiness and graduation. And his take on the subject was really about how can a school really have a deliberate focus on student engagement. So his article describes various modes of student connectivity. And what he does is really prioritize, based on his experience and the research they've done there, the notion of relationships, students to adults, students to students, and in fact, adult to adult. And it's really fundamental that as you think about the different aspects of student engagement, you'll find that when students have strong relationships with either other students or the adults in the building, and frankly, when adults have strong relationships with each other around student engagement, there's likely to be greater student engagement. It creates a greater sense of belongingness. It creates a greater sense that students want to be there because they know there's somebody that cares for them and has their best interest in mind. The other point that Bob makes in this article is really this notion that student engagement really can't sort of be one-off. Oh, Mrs. Smith's job, she's the student engagement coordinator. It really has to reflect a holistic approach that is integrated into the overall recovery strategy being taken by a particular school or district. And so that means, it needs to incorporate elements of a school's PBIS approach. It has to be incorporated into their MTSS structures. Anything they're doing to make sure students are on track to graduation, all of those ought to find a way to leverage key tools and modalities of student engagement. Let's go to the next slide. This article, many of you know Hetty Chang at Attendance Works. Hetty's been focused on the idea of chronic absenteeism for a very, very long time. Some of your states are using chronic absenteeism as an indicator in your accountability systems, a non-academic indicator. And Hetty and the team at Attendance Works really brings a really strong history and research basis for what are the key contributors to chronic absenteeism and what are the kind of strategies that can be employed. Again, some of the key takeaways really speak to, students want to be in places where the conditions, they feel physically safe, they feel emotionally safe, they have a sense that their well-being is being recognized, where they make connections with both the subject matter of what's going on as well as the other people that are involved, and there's a sense of belonging to a community. And interestingly enough, where there's also academic challenge. A lot of times students fall by the wayside because they don't see relevancy or they don't feel like they're actually being pushed in terms of stretching their minds and their capabilities. And so that's where academic challenge takes place. This article also then dives deeply into the example of Connecticut that has done some particularly strong work in the chronic absenteeism and student engagement space. And Connecticut has leveraged a variety of tools in their approach. They're looking at data. They're nurturing greater parental engagement as a sort of avenue towards greater student engagement. They're developing strategic partnerships, whether that's with out-of-school providers, after-school providers, other organizations within the community. And then they're also identifying resources that can be used and factoring it into accountability. What are the measures that they can use that help identify whether strategies are working, whether they're making a difference, and how do they use those measures as they go forward? Let's go to the next slide. Haley Corman is at Bellwether. This is really a great article about understanding who's missing and why. The nice thing I like about this article, I'm a big believer in hearing the stories from on-the-ground activity that are taking place. And Haley covers 4 specific instances, looking at the causes of disengagement and some of the approaches that might be able to be used to address those causes. In Yakima, Washington, there's a strong emphasis on data. How can we leverage data and use data to support understanding the causes of disengagement and then addressing those causes? In El Dorado County in California, the focus is really on coordination. It's not just the school that holds the responsibility for student engagement and student attendance. It's other aspects of the community, whether that's social service organizations, law enforcement, after-school programming, and so forth and so on. In Nashville, they're really finally focusing on truancy. How is the school district coordinating with those who are in charge of enforcing the truancy laws, and what can they do differently to create the conditions for more students to engage in learning as well as attend school regularly. Utah is taking a somewhat different approach by fostering a mentoring program. If they partner mentors with students, can that make a difference in terms of student engagement and student participation? Let's go to the next slide. This one is by Travis Pillow and Robin Lake, who are both with the Center on Reinventing Public Education. It's ultimately really focused on state leaders and how do state leaders stand up for the COVID generation of high schoolers. They start by sort of recognizing that a lot of the attention paid in terms of engagement is really on early grades. And so is the attention around reading, mathematics, and many of the other areas that we point to as being where COVID has had its impact. And they attempt to make the case that really high schools need to be also a focus area. And sometimes it's more challenging because the data we collect at the high school level, while we test in one grade level in English and math, the idea is, what other information do we have to bear that can allow us to take a peek into what the high school experience is like? This article really dovetails nicely because the earlier edition this past year of the state education standard back in May was all about high school redesign. And high school redesign at its core really has student voice, engaging with students around what can create an exciting, a sense of belonging, a real interesting high school experience, and how do we move from some of the more traditional structures that we know aren't always engaging or fostering that sense of belonging to ones that are more interesting, either through project-based learning, through work-based learning experiences, and what have you. So we really see this article as a nice companion to that issue, which was called High Schools That Matter. You'll find that also on our website, NASB.org, under publications, the state education standard, High Schools That Matter. Robin and Travis, they go into some key elements that actually contribute to increasing student engagement. And that's this notion of helping students really see their progress, as well as the idea of moving more to mastery models of learning so that students have a clearer picture of they're not just, oh yeah, you're passing this class, but you have a D or a C. You're actually mastering these concepts. And those are the concepts that will be important to you as you transition into the world of work or the world of higher education or the military or other vocations that you may see as appropriate. They talk about making sure that there's good, solid information to families. And this includes both to students and to parents, and that we address this notion of the honesty gap. If a child is reading at the 6th grade level, then does that student know that? Does the family know that? And are we all working collaboratively to help that student address those deficiencies? They're also keen on making more connections between the academic experience and career opportunities, and that can come in a variety of formats. Many schools are organizing as sort of career-focused academies. Many places are fostering work-based learning opportunities or having industry sectors represented within the school, all kinds of options that show the relevancy and really create connections between students and the job opportunities that may exist in their particular community or state. Finally, a real focus on relevancy. And I think this is one of those areas where the voice of students can really play a strong role. I've seen a lot of places where high school principals and the faculty are really sitting down with students and having brutally honest conversations about the relevancy of the coursework, the designs of the courses, how they might create greater connections to the real world, what that might look like, and emerging with some really great ideas and better instructional practices that don't compromise and instructional approaches that don't compromise on learning the standards and learning rigorous content, but that do it in a way that's really engaging for students. Let's go to the next slide. I think this is the last one. This is written by Edward Fletcher at Ohio State University. And again, this sort of takes the previous article and sharpens it even more. It really focuses on this idea of what are career academies? What do they look like? What are the key components of them? How do you infuse the idea of a career academy into a high school, and what does that look like as part of their high school program? Again, a really good read. Let's go to the next slide. No, I was mistaken. This is the last one. And this really gets the whole notion of the whole school policy framework and really infusing trauma-informed practices as part of the student engagement strategy. We know that students felt the brunt of the pandemic in terms of their mental health. And so the more that the faculty in a building, as well as the programming in a building, can integrate trauma-informed practices, the greater the likelihood is that that will help address engagement. Again, if students feel like they belong, that their well-being is being tended to, and this article by Nicole Rettig at Boston University and Jeanette Van Loan at Bucknell University really speaks specifically to that, those particular aspects. And it talks about what teachers need to know and be able to do, how we need to infuse trauma-informed practices into educator preparation programs, and the concept that there might actually be a need for endorsements that help sort of attest to an individual's training in terms of the use of trauma-informed practices. So with that, I'll just close. You have contact information for me on the last slide, as well as my email address, paulo.dimaria@nasb.org. Happy to take any questions now, as well as always welcome people's comments on our publication, people's comments on our work, or other questions that you might have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing so many wonderful resources. We did have a question come in. It may be early, but can you describe how your members have used the information in the standard and other resources that you shared to develop their post-pandemic policies?
Yes, I would say it is a little bit early. Again, our members have been involved in pandemic recovery activity from the start. And I think this understanding of some of the enrollment variations and what can be done about it has been an area of key learning for them. In fact, we've got a conference coming up in late October in San Diego, our annual conference, and there'll be a number of sessions that speak to, we actually have a special pre-conference session around high school redesign, because a lot of times people know that the student engagement issue is not necessarily new. It existed even prior to the pandemic. And I think people view the pandemic as having amplified it so that it became more visible. And now it's getting them focused on not only, sort of the recovery side of student engagement, but really the fundamental issues of how can we make learning much more engaging, much more interesting, much more relevant. You're seeing people more robustly talk about the idea of mastery-based learning as opposed to the Carnegie unit. What are those different ways that students can learn? How can we provide support for learning that happens outside the classroom, in the workplace, in other learning atmospheres like scouting programs or other places where students are acquiring knowledge, but it's not always clear from an academic, seat time perspective. And so many state boards are doing that kind of work. In the publication, you'll see a handful of states highlighted for their practices. And we see more all the time. We have other publications that we put out when we have when we have 3 or 4 really good case studies. We'll put out a state innovations publication or a policy insights publication that will speak to where great things are happening and how people can find out more.
Wonderful. Another question came in while you were talking. You mentioned that state boards of education identify the topics for the standard. This person is curious what you're considering for your next issues.
Yeah, our next issue is going to be about curriculum, interestingly enough. And it's one of those where, again, we see all this great activity happening around the science of reading or alignment with the standards, some of the fundamentals about academic outcomes. And I always appreciate when the RAND Corporation comes out with their annual surveys of enacted curriculum. Like, what are teachers actually teaching in the classroom, and how does that relate back to a state standards? And invariably, and this even precedes the pandemic, there were evidence that it wasn't like 90% of what's being taught in the classroom aligns with academic standards. And so, the question then rises: how can we help people improve their curriculum selection processes? How do we help understand what really good curriculum and curricular practices look like? And what are those different aspects of the question of curriculum that can really contribute to improving academic outcomes for students? So that's what the next standard is going to be focused on.
Fantastic, thank you. We actually did have one more question come in, and I think also this would be a good one from Melissa from CCSSO to weigh in on. This person is specifically looking for resources and contacts related to attendance and mental health issues in California. But to broaden it out, I'm wondering if you could both share where people can look for resources related to their state in particular.
So I'll be happy to get started. One of the interesting things, NASB also has a collaborative project that we're doing with the American Academy of Pediatrics on building bridges around student mental health and family engagement. So, and one of the things that we found is that states typically have a large amount of resources, but they're not always people aren't always well aware of where they are located. And so what we've been doing, part of the The project teams that we put together involve the PTA, they involve the State Department of Education, they involve the American Academy of Pediatrics. And I think what you will find is that many state education agencies, the departments of education, have resources around student well-being and student mental health, as well as do the cognizant departments within each state that are focused on mental health. Sometimes it's the health department that has a mental health office. In Ohio, for instance, there's a separate department of mental health. There are also a variety of resources, I think, available through a variety of mental health organizations like NAMI and sometimes the Children's Hospital Associations. But even as I say these things, I think to myself, well, they're all over, in different places. And I think what we're trying to do is say, how do we get information in people's hands about where those resources are located so that they can be used more deliberately?
Yes, thanks, Paolo. I think to build on that, visiting, the California Department of Education website is a great place to start. And if you're not able to navigate that, I always think just calling them and asking them for the resources is, having somebody pick up the phone and just telling them what you're looking for. I also think Paolo mentioned earlier that Hedy Chang with Attendance Works is an expert in the area of attendance and chronic absenteeism. And so if you're struggling to find the resource you need specifically on that issue, she's happy to help, and we can type that information into the chat. But my information is in the slides. And so I'm happy to just send you the link to California's website on those mental health well-being or specifically on the attendance information we have for the state of California, and make those connections if we're able to do so.
And I want to put in a plug for 988, right? A lot of people don't know that we now have a new crisis hotline number for mental health. Again, I'm not saying use it for basic informational requests, but we need to spread the word. That 988 is out there as a resource for people when they find themselves or dealing with another individual or a child or a student with mental health issues. It's a great resource, and it's just people are still becoming aware of it, and so just want to put that in people's ears. 988.
Thank you both. I appreciate everybody contributing. I'm going to hand it back to Susan to close us out. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Laura. And thank you to all of our presenters today, especially CCSSO and the National Association of State Boards of Education. Paolo, we really appreciate your collaboration on this. It made meaningful connections to folks in the field and really connected the work to some of the research that's going on. Just as a quick thing, kind of wrap up, I do want to say, this is complicated work. There's a lot of, as Paolo mentioned, things that we had been doing that actually maybe weren't our top priority, but have become our top priority due to the pandemic. And so that's really important to think about. And I think a lot of the things that were talked about today, I'm thinking specifically of Missouri, that's really trying to create conditions in their schools to have well-staffed schools with teachers who are prepared and ready and being compensated appropriately and appreciated to create better conditions in schools so that students can engage. This idea of relationships and how it's not just, it's student to adult relationships, student to student relationships, but adult to adult relationships, and creating those conditions continues to rise in importance. And I truly appreciated what Georgia had to share in terms of really kind of getting underneath this general trauma that everyone experienced with regard to the pandemic, and getting underneath that and seeing what are the what are ways that are factors that we should consider when we're thinking about creating more intensive supports for some versus others based on their personal experience, and also thinking about differentiation in terms of that intensity of resources, either at an individual level, but at a school level also, and really looking deeper into that work. And then lastly, but not least, the just incredibly wise way North Carolina has approached their work and leveraged existing relationships to expand and amplify their work. That is one thing that I am seeing kind of as a theme, is that the level and degree of preparation, not knowing a pandemic would happen, but relationships with the field really seem to make a big difference for outcomes and recovery efforts. So a big round of applause to everyone. We really appreciate all that you've brought together. And I hope that all of you in attendance can see how we're really trying to braid this idea of what's going on with policymakers and practitioners now, what they're really working on and putting big bets on as they move into this recovery period. And all of this together, orchestrated, creates better opportunities for student engagement. So thank you so much. I can't leave without doing a few plugs for the Restart Network. If you want any additional resources, we have been collecting them. We know there's a lot of folks who are doing this work, and we are trying to collaborate with those folks as well. But one thing you'll find in our work is that we're really trying to focus on the research and things that have evidence or identify strategies that people are using. So that's sort of something that we are very committed to. And with that, we will be sharing findings and amplifying findings from our research teams, which are all over the country. But also, we want to hear about your work, because we want to be able to share that as well. So we do have a registry of studies. You do not have to, as I've said, have completed the study. Just even if you have one underway, we want to hear about it. We'd love to share that out and help you get information out to the field as well. And so please feel free to submit any information that you have. And of course, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me or anyone else on the Restart team. And with that, I would like to give each of you, thank you for all of your participation, but also give each of you an opportunity to respond to a survey and give us some feedback on how we're doing, other things that you'd like to see, and just like really open to feedback. That's how we've been kind of operating to date, and we really, really value your perspective. So you should see a link to the feedback survey in the chat. And please, please, please respond to that. We take it very seriously. And with that, I'd like to conclude our session. Thank you, everyone.